Clementine. So I think I'll do the same thing that I did with the last presentation and just give it a couple of minutes before I get officially started, just to see if there are a few more people joining us. Hi, Marvin. Like the same guys over again. Good. I didn't scare you away. That's cool. So yeah, we'll just give it a few more minutes and then we'll have more of a chat about Sidemount diving. Of all of you that are there yet, are you already Sidemount divers? Anyone tried it? Everybody new and just wants to know a little bit more? It's just as addictive as technical diving, probably a bit more actually. Yeah. Okay. Kelly, you're just adding to your list. And I promise you, it's going to get longer and longer and longer. Those like lists of things that you want to do, they grow. I think Karen has just joined us also. Karen, I just said to the other guys, we're going to take a couple of minutes just to wait and see if there's more people joining us. But in the meantime, I've asked if anyone that's here has tried Sidemount. If you're already Sidemount diver, you want to find out a little bit more. So if you want, just let us know over in the chat. And guys, if you have questions, either keep them for a little bit later or write them to me in the chat. This presentation doesn't have as many slides as the previous one, so there's definitely lots and lots of time for a chat afterwards. Hi, Brian, thanks for joining us. All right. Yeah, so we'll just give a few more minutes, see if there's a few more people hopping onto the session. I know it's busy, there's lots of sessions going on, lots of stuff happening on the main stage as well, so thank you very much for being here. You can maybe see in my background, hi Nicholas, it's getting dark over here, it's about 6:30, so depending where you are, I think you're heading for lunchtime. All right, cool. So, okay, if you guys are all ready, I'm going to start jumping into this presentation. Now, some of you have said that you haven't tried Sidemount diving before, so feel free to ask more basic questions and all of that. I did call it Sidemount diving in open ocean, and if there's ever a good reason for it. So why did I call it this? Sidemount diving really comes from cave diving, and actually the very, very initial concept was explored in the UK by sump divers. Sump divers basically are people that are trying to explore dry caves, and they come across these annoying, in inverted commas, areas of wet cave that they need to get through. And slinging a tank around the side, even attaching it to the leg, was an easy way of getting through the wet bits. So before I jump any more into the topic, to those of you that haven't met me, my name is Yvonne. I am a TDI instructor trainer based in Bali, where I run my own tech diving center, Dark Horizon Diving, and where I teach on Sidemount, Backmount, and rebreather. Sidemount diving has been something that I've been doing for the last 5 years. I started with a trial in a pool that was just available when I was tech diving somewhere else in Indonesia, and I fell a little bit in love. Over the last year or so, my rebreather has definitely taken over, but if I just go for an easy fun dive, even here in Bali where we dive deep reefs, more often than not, it is in Sidemount configuration. So over the next hour, all I want to do is have a chat with you guys over why you would want to choose Sidemount diving, why you'd want to try it, even if you are not in a cave, what the reasons are for it, benefits, and obviously answer your questions. So for questions, put them in the chat or save them for later. There's definitely going to be enough time to go through them. So Sidemount's been almost a bit of a buzzword within diving, within technical diving. It's definitely grown in popularity. And whilst maybe 10 years ago you could have said, oh, it's just a fad, it's just a passing fashion, we'll be over it soon, we can definitely say now that it is here to stay. If you look at training agencies' figures, I got in touch last year with a few agencies, and year on year, TDI was reporting a growth of 10%. PADI was reporting an even bigger growth. So it is something that definitely, if we look at certifications, is definitely growing in popularity. So all these people can't be wrong. So what we want to look at is why you might want to choose Sidemount. Now, to those of you who have actually never tried Sidemount diving before, if you look at the two divers in the picture here, you can just about see that we are carrying 3 tanks. Why 3? Because it's a decompression dive. So what you see is under our arms are 2 tanks, which would be how you would start out in most cases in Sidemount. So one under each arm, one along each of your sides. The third tank you see sort of underneath the tank on our left side here is our decompression gas tank, because it's a decompression dive. So balance and stability. Having your tanks aligned with your side really gives you a natural buoyancy. It almost forces you into trim, whether you like it or not. It's just how your tanks want your body to be. So it gives you a nice and stable feeling underwater, and it definitely promotes diving and trim. And if you're following any of the information coming out of training agencies, anything that's going on the forums, you will have seen that training agencies, really all of them, are pushing towards teaching and trim, getting divers to be neutral from the beginning. And whilst maybe diving 2 tanks from the beginning is a bit too tricky, Sidemount really helps promote diving and trim being nice and stable underwater. So more reasons for it. Flexibility and configurability. What do I mean by that? You get a choice. You can dive 1 or 2 tanks. Personally, I'm a big believer in diving 2 tanks because it does give you that redundancy. So if something goes wrong with 1 tank, if there's a problem on one side, you have an answer to that. Something's wrong with that regulator, you can simply go to the other tank and you're good. If you're doing what used to be very common, your 2-tank boat, 2 morning dives, fine. You use the top half of the 2 tanks for your first dive, and your second dive you use up the bottom half. So you don't have to necessarily change tanks in between dives. You simply take the same two tanks. You can dive Sidemount with a single tank. It would simply be on one of your sides, and no, you will not completely tilt 90 degrees. It doesn't work like that, especially with aluminium tanks. Aluminium tanks might feel heavy when you carry them on the surface, when you carry them around on land, but they're relatively neutral underwater. So you could even, if you want things to be really simple, take one single tank on your side. Now, you can see here it says no special tanks needed, although preferable. So if you look at the picture on the side on the bottom, these are normal DIN tanks. You can dive Sidemount with normal DIN tanks. Personally, I'm not a big fan of having yoke regulators or yoke adapters because it makes something that is all about being streamlined and all about minimizing entanglement into something that is now no longer streamlined. But basic DIN tanks are something that is really readily available pretty much almost anywhere you go diving now. Specialist tanks, what would that mean? That would mean having an extension on your valve. So on the side where you have the little burst disc. So if you look at the bottom picture, you have the hand wheel where you open or close your tank, and on the other side of the tank you have a little bit of metal just sticking out. With a dedicated side mount tank, that part would be extended so that it is easier to hook the bungee that's coming from your harness around the top of the tank and allow it to sit nice and streamlined under your arm. You can kind of see that in the top picture there. If you look at the diver that's closest to you, there's a bungee running just from the harness, and you can kind of see it black on black around the tank valve. So 1 or 2 tanks, you get a choice. You can have redundancy if you think that extra safety is a good idea for the diving you're doing, or if you're one of those people who like their gas underwater a little bit too much and often go through their gas quite quickly. Or you can have a very simple setup for shallow dives, and you don't necessarily need special tanks. So there's really a lot of flexibility in that configuration. Next reason, comfort and safety. Gas shutdowns are simple, even with limited mobility. Now, I think Kelly is still watching here, and we just talked in my previous session about learning to dive twin sets and possibly having a problem reaching the valves behind you for shutdowns. That's something that with side mount is easy. Your valves are in front of you, they're under your armpits, so not only are they easy to reach, but also you can see where the problem is, if there is a problem. Handling equipment before and after the dive can be easier because you can carry 1 tank at a time. There's less strain on the diver's back. It's especially good for people who are starting to feel that they have problems with discs, slip discs, that. Many photographers like side mount because of the headspace. So you can move your head more freely than you would if you have a manifold valve behind you. And last but not least, there is such a thing as personal preference. Twin sets are probably still the more common way of learning to tech dive, but there are plenty of people who enjoy side mount better, and why shouldn't they dive their preferred configuration? Why shouldn't they be allowed to make that choice as long as there are no safety problems, as long as there are no real downsides to making that choice? Another reason I have here is technical diving and exploration in remote areas. Now, I don't know how many of you, or if any one of you has ever gone diving somewhere where diving is maybe not very common to start with, and where there isn't a lot of gear or facilities in place for any technical diving. Now, those areas might be some of the best dive sites you'll ever see. So the Mola Mola picture you're looking at here was taken in South Lombok, in an area that's very rarely dived, and where none of the dive shops, there are very few dive shops there to begin with, none of them has twin sets, none of them has rebreather supplies. So really going in there with side mount equipment to try and explore a little bit deeper, try and explore a little bit more, was an ideal solution for initial exploration, for actually going to take that look with additional safety, additional gas, to see whether it's worth going again and exploring more. The picture you're seeing there is really just one frame out of, I think, a 10-minute encounter with altogether 3 mola molas on a cleaning station. So it was one of these really quite magical dives that wouldn't have been possible if we'd not had additional gas. We wouldn't have been able to stay. Maybe we would have seen them briefly, but we would not have had the same kind of encounter. So side mount allows you to go into these places and take a look at dive sites that you might not always be able to see otherwise. It's the perfect tool to help open up a new area for technical diving to do that initial exploration. And if you find something promising, then maybe you decide to come back next time and bring more equipment. But you've had this opportunity to have this initial check on whether or not this is something that you think is going to be worthwhile exploring more. Small dive boats. I don't know if any of you have dived in Indonesia, but there's a lot of places in Indonesia where the dive boats are most definitely not custom built for technical diving. So a lot of the dive boats have got tank racks, like you can see in the bottom left here, where there's space for one tank at a time, but there's not really a great deal of space for anything for twin sets, where there isn't necessarily space to store rebreathers and all of that. And again, that brings side mount diving pretty much into its own, because really what you're handling is one tank at a time. So you can use the space more efficiently. You're using the space that recreational divers would use. Makes it easier for the crew because they can take your tanks in, put your tanks in the water for you, and handle them one tank at a time. And quite often, if your surface conditions allow, if your dive profile allows, you can put your equipment on or take it off in the water. So what do I mean by that? You can literally get off the boat with your harness and wings, so the equivalent to your BCD, on your mask, your fins. You roll off the boat like that, and the crew gives you your tanks, one tank at a time. You attach them, you rig them up in the sea. Now, if you're going somewhere where a fast entry is necessary, maybe some of you guys have done negative entries. So if you're doing that, then it's a good idea to get ready on the boat. But with side mount diving, you have that opportunity to get ready in the water. Keeping up skills. Now, I mentioned right in the beginning that side mount diving really comes from cave diving, from exploring small spaces where there's no space for twin sets. Not every cave diver has the opportunity to be in caves all the time. And in order to keep up your skills, dive in open ocean. Take those side mount tanks into the ocean and practice some of your skills so that they stay fresh, so that if you are taking them back into a cave, you have plenty of space. Not so much plenty of space, but you're taking them back into a cave and your skills are fresh, and you can apply them as you aim to apply them without having to spend the time, the limited time maybe that you have on that cave diving trip, refreshing those skills. So don't underestimate what you could do in side mount, what you could already achieve before you go back into those caves, before you go back diving wrecks. Now, I spent quite a bit of time telling you about why I think that side mount in open ocean is an amazing idea. There might be situations where it's not your preferred configuration. Take a look at this picture. Now, before you guys tell me I'm crazy, the person in the picture, Harvard, here did his course with me up to 4 tanks in side mount. In this picture, he's carrying 6. Why is he carrying 6? Because we simply, after the course, on a shallow dive, wanted to try out how that feels. Whether or not you can fit 6 tanks on the diver, what that feels like, whether that is a good idea. So, and personally to me, 4 tanks is my limit in side mount. 4 tank is not because I can't carry 5, but because then all the benefits that I got from side mount, all that flexibility, all that stability, all that ease of handling starts turning around and starts becoming more of a negative. So up to 4 tanks, for me, in side mount works really well. More than 4 tanks, for practice, like in this picture, and just to try, yes. But to really go for a long dive, I would then consider that we're losing out on the benefit of using all the space on the diver, of using all that space on the diver's back. Some people have argued that complex gas management, having to switch between the tanks to keep the gas level in them relatively similar, leads to additional task loading. I've got it there with a question mark. More than 4 tanks. Diving from large boats. Now, diving from large boats in Sidemount to me is not necessarily a negative, but if you're going to have to jump off a boat with all your tanks on, and you're going to have to walk to the end of the dive deck, then it's a good idea to have a think about how you rig those tanks, how you can get them on, and where you want to get ready on that boat. So if you know that you cannot kit up at the water, for example, then see if you can find a space that is close to the exit point. Makes life easier. So with different boats, different conditions, it's worth spending a little bit of time having a look at where you're going to be and what that means for how you get ready, how you kit up, which actually, if you're thinking in terms of technical diving, complex diving, that's something you would do in most cases anyways. And most of these issues that we've mentioned there, complex gas management, task loading, lots of tanks, maybe a boat moving in swell, a lot of that can be resolved by quality training and thorough understanding of the configuration. Now, there are quite a few people that believe that sidemount diving is nothing other than clipping 2 tanks to your sides, and I would say that isn't quite right. One of the benefits of sidemount, we've talked about all this flexibility, is that everything can be adjusted. And that's also a little bit of a disadvantage because it means that every single change will make a difference. So if you're simply clipping those tanks, then what you find is that they're just hanging off you. As soon as you move, they're dangling. And then you're losing all those benefits of that streamlining, of being so tidy as a diver underwater. And those things usually take a bit of practice. So a basic course will set you on the way, will introduce you to all your different options of adjustment, but it will not necessarily give you enough time to really try them out for yourself. So good understanding of the configuration, learning after the course, practicing things, trying them out, getting somebody to maybe watch you whilst you do that. All of those are really good ideas. And if you follow those things, you can make sidemount work in pretty much any situation. So I did promise you there were fewer slides in this presentation. So I am going to jump out of the full screen and come back onto your screen where I can see you. So talked a little bit about benefits and downsides of side mounts. Hi, Philip, just joining us now, cool. So what else was I going to say? I was going to actually ask at this point, there were a few of you at the beginning who said you haven't tried Sidemount, you're interested in exploring it. Do you guys have any questions? Also, if you've just joined us now, maybe let us know if you're already a Sidemount diver, if you've got specific questions, and we can jump backwards and forwards and try and get those questions answered. Yeah, so pretty much everybody's saying you're interested in trying. Now, different, maybe talk to you a little bit about trying. Depending on where you are, and with traveling being limited, a lot of instructors, a lot of places that offer sidemount diving will offer a trial in, for example, a swimming pool, or similar to what you can do for a Discover Scuba diving, you can do a one-day trial of sidemount diving. that one day will not teach you everything you've always wanted to know about Sidemount, but what that one day might do is give you more of an understanding of what the ins and outs are, and it might give you enough to just understand whether you think this is something that you want to pursue. So if you think you want to try a little bit more, learn a little bit more, generally basic Sidemount courses, all of this depends a little bit on the individual agency, on the individual instructor, so not necessarily set in stone, but a lot of basic Sidemount courses are set around the 3 to 4 dive mark. Now, for those of you that joined me in the previous presentation, you've already heard me say that I teach mostly TDI courses. With the TDI basic Sidemount course, it is 3 dives. I add a pool session just because with all those things that you can adjust and all those things that you can change around, I like jumping in a pool first to see what's what, to see how things have worked out between the equipment setup session that we did on land and then the actual taking it in the water for the first time. It also means that if there's a lot of questions coming up, then you can just pop to the surface and talk. And that popping to the surface and talking isn't really a massive option, even if you're on a shallow dive. So 2 to 3 days will give you an introductory qualification, an introductory look at it. It will not get, not in 2 to 3 days will you get to this point where everything is super perfect. But Sidemount is one of these things, if you like gear, if you like playing with gear, if you like sort of going, well, that was good, but I'd like to adjust it another little bit and another little bit, then Sidemount diving's for you. And again, you'll enjoy that journey. So it's definitely something to stick with. What type of cylinders do you use? Ali or steel? Depends largely where you are, Kelly. Here in Asia, we have pretty much exclusively aluminium cylinders, and which tanks you use actually makes quite a difference to how you set up your Sidemount harness. So if you guys know how aluminium tanks behave, you know they get quite a bit more buoyant as the dive progresses. So as your tank gets more buoyant, what you do is you move the cam band further forward on your waist. So I'm just going to make that last image big again. So you can see at the bottom of the tank, the upper tank on the diver, there's a cam band there, and that could also be a Jubilee clip. That's attached to the belt of the harness. Now, you would then, as the tank gets lighter, move that cam band further forward so that it becomes, so it goes kind of closer to your navel. The steel tanks generally stay heavy throughout the dive. So the steel tanks, you don't tend to move during the dive. Aluminium tanks need a little bit of flexibility because they change so much in their buoyancy characteristics. Steel tanks need to actually be pulled in a little bit more and held a bit tighter because of their heaviness. And actually, we've just been joined by Sven and Rini from Deluxe Dive Gear. I'm going to plug you, and I hope you're going to send me some tank straps. Deluxe Dive Gear actually make some really, really nice Sidemount tank straps if you guys are looking into getting your own stuff. Good quality, they'll last you for quite a while, and they're made for the job. Now, Sidemount, I've talked about all of this flexibility, and there's a lot of ways of making a lot of things work, which is one of these great characteristics of it that make it so suitable for exploration, for anything that you do where you might not have very specific gear, like twin sets, like CCR supplies available. But like with all things, if you have the right gear for the job, it will make your job easier. So if you are thinking about getting some of your own side mount gear, tank straps, anything, check out the Deluxe booth. So Kelly, if you're going to ask, what would you prefer, aluminium or steel tanks? Honestly, it isn't so much this one's better, this one's worse. It's more of a case of saying, okay, I have these tanks, so that means I need to do that with my setup. So it's more knowing, okay, this means that. And I'm just going to pop back into the presentation to point out something else. So here on this keeping up skills slide on the top picture, this is Heather, never mind, she's an underwater photographer, but she was, for example, trained in steel tanks. So the first time I met her, she came as a fun diver to the dive shop that I was working at before I started Dark Horizon, and wasn't aware that with aluminium tanks, you have to make those adjustments as the dive goes on. If you're trained in aluminium tanks, it's something you do from the first side mount dive onwards, so it's just what you do. But if you're trained in steel tanks, it's just not necessarily something that's on your radar. So this picture was actually taken during a workshop that we did to help her adjust her setup so that it's more suitable for aluminium tanks, and so that she's got a better understanding of what does happen to those tanks as your dive goes on. So there's no better or worse, there is understanding which one does what. I hope that's answered some of your questions. Your twin set, yeah, your twin set, is that steel or aluminium? Okay, so why would you choose steel? For example, we've talked a little bit earlier on about dry suits and heavy undergarments. Often dry suits and heavy undergarments mean weight, carrying lots of lead. So if that's part of the equation, and if steel tanks are easier to come by, then picking steel would make sense, because you then don't need to add a lot of that extra lead. If you're thinking, no, I still want to dive aluminium, I still want to do that, then take a look at what harness you choose. So again, I'm going to jump back into the presentation just to highlight a couple of things. Let me just find the image I want. Here we are. So if you look at the picture at the top there, you see the diver in the foreground on an X-Deep harness, and then the diver in the background on a dive right harness. This isn't about good or bad harnesses. It's just about looking at what features you're looking for. The X-Deep range of harnesses has pretty much column of weights running all the way down the diver's spine. So you need to imagine them as kind of flat weight pockets, independent weight pockets, so you can put your weights exactly where you need them. Personally, I think that's an excellent feature because it makes it so easy to put the weight that you need onto your setup and put it exactly where you want it to be. So personally, I like mine to be closer towards the bottom of the harness, simply because the aluminium tanks, so they're going to get light from the bottom. So they're going to start rising up, rising up, rising up. So if I then have a little bit of weight on the harness there, it's going to give me that little bit of negative buoyancy to keep my trim, make it more easy to keep in trim. On the other side, if you look at the top of the tanks, that is where your valves are, where your first stages are. So they're the heavy parts, and they're going to stay heavy. Their weight is not going to change as the dive goes on. So they're always going to want to stay heavy. So having a harness where you can put those weights in then makes a whole lot of sense. The other thing that is interesting to look at is to look at where which kind of tanks your side mount equipment was made for. Now, just because it was maybe intended to be more used with steel tanks doesn't mean it's completely and utterly unusable with aluminium. But if something is specifically made for one or the other, then it's just never going to be perfect for the other job. The X-Deep, and I'm not getting paid, the X-Deep harness does both pretty well, accommodates both pretty well. Some of the American brands were really configured specifically to work very well with steel tanks. So it's worth looking into that a bit more before you commit to anything and before you really go, okay, this is what I really want to do, and this other type of equipment doesn't really work for me too much. I hope that has answered some of your questions. What about the other guys? Frank, Marvin, you've sort of said you were interested, but you haven't tried Sidemount yet. What's keeping you from trying? Other than Corona this year, that's the sort of answer to everything. We've all been, I think, really curtailed in what we can do with our lives this year. Or Clementine, you also said you want to know a little bit more. So maybe you're also thinking about giving Sidemount a try or giving technical diving a try. What other questions do you guys have? You're all being very quiet. Okay, so maybe whilst you're thinking, I'll talk about one other thing. I touched on it a little bit. So when we dive Sidemount, we use just time. Oh wow, you're finishing a PhD. Okay, good luck with that. I hope it's going well. And yes, I can see that everything else has probably had to be taking a backseat whilst you're finishing that. Yeah, I never did a PhD, but I remember writing my thesis at the end of university, and it was good to start, but it was also good to start seeing it coming together and seeing where the finish line was. So yeah, best of luck with all of that. The other thing I was going to talk about, for those of you that are thinking about Sidemount, we obviously have two tanks, and they're independent of each other. We talked a little bit about tanks getting lighter. So one of the things as Sidemount divers we try to do is to keep the amount of gas in your tanks fairly similar for two reasons. One, so that if something happens with one tank, we can always go to the other tank and we have enough gas there to finish our dive safely. Two, comfort, balance. So imagine if you forget to switch gas during the dive, you might end up with one tank that's very heavy and another one that's trying to pull up. That's just uncomfortable. You can counteract that a little bit by moving the tank on your waist, but generally it's something that you want to try and avoid. So different ways of going about it. If you ask me how close I want the amount of gas in my tanks to be to each other, in an ideal world, I'd like them to be within 10 or 20 bar of each other, but that's personal preference also. And I prefer them to be that relatively close to each other in pressure because I can feel the difference. So how would you do that on a normal dive? So imagine you get one tank that's got 200 bar, and you get another one that's got 220. So it would make sense to start with the one that's got more gas, breathe that down to about 190 bar. Now you've got the one here that's 200, so you switch over, just take your regulator out, clip it, put the other one in, and breathe this down to about 180. Even if you mess it up and you end at 170, you're still within 20 bar of each other. Now you catch up this one, catch up that one, and keep them as level as possible. And that's something that's really a big part of the initial side mount training, because it is something that is new to a lot of divers. You're not just checking how much gas you have, but you're checking that it is a similar amount on both tanks to keep them level. How can you help yourself do that? If you're staying at a similar depth, you could make a mental note to switch after 5 minutes or 10 minutes and do it like this. For photographers, for example, some photographers have a reputation for being a little bit distracted or a lot distracted, being busy taking pictures and kind of forgetting to watch out for their body, watch out for their teammate, watch out for their gas. But then a strategy, for example, would be to concentrate on shooting pictures of one motif that you're looking at, one subject, finish with that subject, check your gas, possibly switch your regulator, move on to the next subject. So all of those are different strategies that you can use if you're diving side mount. Anyone got any other questions? Feel free also to jump on the screen with me, and then we can sort of talk to each other a little bit more. Kelly's asking, do you need special regulators? Yes and no. It really helps, and I'm just going to make this big again. So if you can see the bottom picture here, actually, yeah, if you can see the bottom picture here, you can see that these regulators swivel. So you've got the turret on the regulator. That really helps to have the hose routed just exactly how you want it to be. So if you can have first stages with turrets, that really helps. Also, if you look at that first stage here, you can see that there's an inflator hose that's coming sideways. So on me, if I was wearing the tank here, that inflator hose would come across my body here. So you would want something called a fifth port. It allows you to have that hose running exactly the right way. So other than that, the right size hose lengths help. So is there a point in buying a specific side mount set? Honestly, if you're sticking with it, yes. If side mount becomes your thing, if you want to dive side mount well, if you want to really benefit from all the advantages of the configuration, then having things set up correctly will go a long way. But just like we said in the earlier presentation with starting technical diving, take a look at the equipment you have together with your instructor and work out what you already have, which parts can be reused, which parts you might want to buy new, and take it from there. When I first took technical diving seriously, I was going back and forth between twin sets and side mount a lot. And I reconfigured my regulators from back mount to side mount relatively regularly. I simply had the parts that were different separately. So for side mount diving, I had short SPGs, short high pressure hoses with SPGs, and they would come off if I reconfigured for back mount diving and then come back on for side mount diving. And at some point I got to a point where I was changing backwards and forwards too much, but then also becoming busier as a technical diving instructor, and it just made no more sense to go backwards and forwards. Basically, like for any technical diving or related, you want a good quality balanced regulator, but it really, really does help to have these swiveling turret regulator as first stages. That really makes it easier. Hopefully that answers the regulator questions. Anyone else has any questions about side mount that you've always wanted to ask? Clementine, ask away. Yeah, or put it in the, yeah, you can wait for later, or you can put it in here, and we'll see if anyone else has Sidemount related questions. Completely up to you. Anyone else for any more questions? Ha, Frank, we touched on this a little bit earlier. I'm just going to jump back to that slide. So most of my personal Sidemount diving has been in Asia in warm waters. So when I became a Sidemount diver, I had already moved from Europe to Asia, so I was already in warm waters. Arguments that you will find against Sidemount diving will talk about complex gas management, which is the switching that we've talked a little bit about, to keep the tanks at roughly the same gas pressure. I personally find that just becomes part of your routine, but it is something that when you're new to Sidemount is something that you do need to learn, do need to internalize. You can see this a little bit in this picture, more than 4 tanks. So when it comes to diving with more than 4 tanks, that's where I draw the line. That's where I think Sidemount loses, to me personally, its benefits and starts becoming more tricky than twin set diving. It then just becomes, and you can see that a little bit on the diver in the picture, it's as if you're wearing a suit of armor around your front that then leaves your back completely empty, and it then becomes a bit of a questionable use of space. Large boats require a bit of thinking about how you're going to get on, how you're going to get off. I find a lot of the time you can really make that work by taking time to look at the boat, look at the setup, have a chat to the crew the day before, so you know what you're expecting the day before the dives. The other things that people have sort of said against diving Sidemount is that it takes Sidemount divers forever to get ready. And I think that's a bit of a myth. If you're new to Sidemount, yes, you might find it takes you longer to get ready, but if you, and that's what I mean by on this slide, by much of this can be resolved by high quality training and understanding of the configuration. If you're learning to dive Sidemount, a part of your training should be developing a real routine for how you are kitting up, for how you're getting ready for the dive, and how you are already cleaning up your gear underwater before the dive, how you're stowing regulators and tanks that you no longer need, for example, on your last decompression stop or at the end of your safety stop, so that when you come to the surface, you can be very efficient either about handing tanks off to boat crew or making your way out of the water. So where I do most of my diving, in the northeast of Bali, we do a lot of shore diving, but we also do dive from boats. For shore diving, there's obviously the question, how do you get in the water when you have more than 2 tanks? Because you have 2 hands and that's it. So then, depending on what the conditions are like, often it's possible to have one person of the team in the water taking care of all the additional tanks, where the rest of the team ferries in tanks 2 at a time. Here, diving from boats, we generally have the benefit of being able to kit up on the surface and dekit on the surface, but still the boat pickup is always something that wants to be well considered. So I tend to have all but one of my tanks ready to hand up to the boat before I either come up from my last eco stop or from the safety stop, so that it's just a case of eyeballing the boat, handing up an SMB, and starting to hand up tanks so that it all becomes quite a fluid process. I've dived side mount in currents, and again, it's about knowing how to handle your configuration. If you're drifting along a reef, you're quite streamlined. If there is an up or a down current, now you suddenly become quite a big target for that current to pick up. But if you're on, let's say, a wall or a slope, then you can go in trim with the wall, if that's the thing, to make yourself a little bit more streamlined. So again, it goes back to training and skills and understanding the configuration. So I wouldn't sort of, as a blanket, say there are situations where it's completely unsuitable. Personally, I draw the line at 4 tanks, but that's also got to do with strength and size. Yeah, so that would be my take on where side mount might make sense. Hi Leslie, good to have you. We've moved on to questions, but if you have anything specific on side mount, please feel free to ask away. So guys, we've got about 10 minutes left. Frank has another question. 11-liter Ali 80s, the only tanks people really use for side mount? No, they are, well, if you've watched the presentation, you've seen them throughout the presentation, but that is because they are the most commonly available tanks we have here in Bali. But for example, Ali 40s, 5.5 liter S40s are a really good alternative for example, very small divers that don't have high gas consumption, that are struggling to lift heavy things. So then 2 S40s, 5.5 liters, are a good tank to take into the water. In the UK, you'll see a lot of divers diving with steel tanks for their main gas, and then potentially using Ali 80s as their decompression tank, because that way, if you have 3 tanks altogether, 1 on each side and 1 for decompression, that aluminium 80 is relatively neutral, so it means that balancing things out is easier. If you look at diving in Florida, there are a lot of different kinds of steel tanks being used. There are low pressure steel tanks, high pressure steel tanks, so it really then depends on what people want to do. Where I am based in Southeast Asia, aluminium 80s, 11 liters, are just the main tank you will come across, and they're a very, very suitable tank for the job. So that's the one that you'll see the most regularly. I hope that answers your question. Hi Sarah, thank you for joining us. We're in the questions part of the presentation. We've got about 10 minutes left, so please feel free throwing any questions at me and I'll be happy to answer them. You're welcome, Frank. That's what I'm here for. Anyone else, any more side mount questions? You guys are getting very quiet. Maybe one thing, we've touched on this a little bit in the tech transition presentation a little bit earlier. If you change environments, in Sidemount if you change gear. So, for example, from wetsuits to dry suits, from aluminium to steel. If you can at all manage, give yourself a little bit of extra time. Give yourself like let's call it a transition day. Give yourself a day where you can just go and play with your setup. Maybe even if you, let's say you arrive the afternoon before your diving package really starts, if you can grab a couple of tanks and even just jump in the pool to get everything set up so you want the way you want it to be, that can make all the difference to your diving that you then do for the actual part of the holiday. Sidemount is about tinkering and adjusting. I remember distinctly when I first got my XD harness, I set it up and I really liked the way it felt underwater, and I thought I was this perfect side mount diver until I saw some video of me. I looked at the video and I went, oh, it might feel good, which is a big thing. If you're comfortable in the water, if you feel that you're streamlined, you feel that there's no drag, that's really a big part of it. But I looked at that video and I found so many little things that I could improve on. And I like playing with gear and I like improving on it, and I like sort of finding those getting those last 10%. So it was one of those, okay, right, now let's try this and see how that goes. Let's adjust the height of the cam band. Let's change the angle on everything. And that's something that we touched on earlier in the presentation. You can adjust everything in Sidemount. That's really cool because you can really make it yours and really get it to that happy place. But also it means that chances are you will spend a bit of time adjusting everything and getting to that point where you are really happy with it. And that doesn't mean bad dives. All of those dives, 99% of those dives are enjoyable. So it's really the messing with gear is really part of the process. Hi, Craig. Thank you for joining us. We've got, guys, about 7 minutes left. So throw any questions out there and we'll cover them as much as we can. Anyone else? I think Clementine had a question earlier, so feel free to throw that there in the comments, or come on the screen with me and we can talk like that. Connection seems to be holding really cool. Okay, right. Here we go with the big one. What is my experience as a woman tech instructor? Sexism can be quite present, even at the recreational level. Gets worse as you progress. So I've certainly been quite often the only female on the boat, the only female in the group. So that's quite a normal thing. And the only way we can fix that is by encouraging more females to become technical divers. I've had some comments early on in my tech instructor life where I've had students tell me that they chose me as an instructor because they thought it would be easier to do it with a female, because they assumed, and I've had, true story, I've had people say to me, well, I'm doing this course with a woman because you won't be able to really demonstrate it, so I won't really have to do it, to make it sort of short. Any specific advice? Concentrate on what you're trying to do. If there are obvious bad comments coming at you, call them out. So if there are people treating you badly, if there are downright sexist and offensive comments coming your way, call them out, because you might actually feel that the other men in the team around you are uncomfortable with that as well, but maybe haven't really found a way of speaking up. The guys that I know that are diving and teaching at my level have realized that it really isn't about whether you're male or female, whether you're a good or a bad tech diver. It's about the amount of time you want to put into it to improve your skills and all of that. I've had people surprised that I can carry my tank alone. Yes, that's okay. They can be surprised. The other side of that is also, if you do need help to carry equipment, everybody needs help from time to time. This isn't about being male or female. It's sort of about asking for help, but if there's sort of bad, this sort of negativity coming back, usually that kind of, I found that sorts itself out when you handle your gear, and quite often being female, that means using technique rather than strength, because you haven't really got the strength, but you can work with your gear rather than working against it. So it's certainly still a very male-dominated area, and one of the things I'm really trying to do is show female students that I have, women that come diving with me, that it's possible. It's completely possible. You can manage a rebreather and 4 stages. It's all about working your way up to it. And every so often, when there is sort of bad feeling or when there's crap coming your way, call it out. Not sure if that's very specific, but yeah. And the only way to fix it is for you to finish your PhD and become a female tech diver. Great plan. So yeah, and it's, yeah, it is more gear, but it's also bigger dives, and it's seeing more, and it's experiencing more. So it's got much more to do with knowledge and building skills than it does with having more muscle. Okay, guys, we have 2 minutes, guys and girls. We have 2 minutes left. Any more questions? Anything that you want to ask about Sidemount diving, about techie diving, anything else in that area, diving in Bali? Maybe you don't want to know about that now because traveling is a thing, or not a thing really, as the case might be, but hit me up. Let me know what you want to know. Or also, if we're running out of time for your questions, come find me at the Dark Horizon Diving booth. I'm on Singapore time, which means it's about 7:30 at night for me now. So if I'm not there personally, put something in the chat, leave me a message there, and I will do my best to either arrange a video chat with you live or answer your questions when I'm back online. Whilst we still have time, some of you joined me a little bit earlier for a presentation on transitioning into technical diving. That presentation is on again tomorrow on Sunday. It is on at 1 p.m. UK time. That's 9 p.m. Singapore time, 9 a.m. US Eastern Standard Time. Hopefully that gives you an idea. So do feel free to join me for that, or send some more questions, whatever you like. So certainly happy to answer them, and yeah, hopefully see you all diving somewhere underwater sometime soon. I think that's us pretty much out of time. So thank you very much. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you very much for joining us. Sam, you're literally coming into here in the last minute of the presentation. You got any last minute questions that you want to throw in that we can answer? If not, if you're joining tomorrow's Transitioning to Tech presentation, feel free to ask Sidemount questions in that one as well. We're covering that a little bit in there, so it's definitely got its place there. It's been really great to have you all. Thank you very much for joining me here. Thank you very much for being at Scuba.Digital. It's a to try out a whole dive show in this way. So it's really cool.